Welcome back everyone to a very special showcase video. As you may know, a nether tree generates with enough wart blocks to make back the Bonemeal used to grow it. So what if you were to precisely calculate the wart block hotspots of the tree, and then harvest those areas at near maximum efficiency? Well, that's what I set out to achieve when I first started this project a year ago, that of designing a fully customizable nether tree farm that gathers a high amount of stems and shroomlights, while still producing more than enough wart blocks to be self-sustaining. To accomplish this, the farm will have to produce more Bonemeal than it uses. So we'll first need to work out how much Bonemeal this farm chews through an hour, and then calculate how many wart blocks we will need to farm and then compost into Bonemeal to satisfy that amount. Fun fact, a fungus has a 40% chance of growing per Bonemeal attempt, meaning that there is an 87% chance of it growing after 4 attempts from 4 dispensers, as calculated by this formula. If we run our farm at the maximum speed a dispenser can clock at, which is once every 4 game ticks, then we can cycle fungus at up to 5 times a second, or 18,000 times an hour. And to calculate how many fungus we actually use each hour, we can simply multiply the amount of cycles an hour by the chance of the fungus growing per cycle, giving us 15,667 fungi grown each hour. So if one Bonemeal attempt gives us a 0.4 chance of the fungus growing, then on average one fungus takes 2.5 Bonemeal to grow, meaning that 39,170 Bonemeal an hour is required to run this farm. Sheesh, that's like 23 shulker boxes worth of Bonemeal use per hour. How many wart blocks would it take to match that? Well, when composting such wart blocks, there's an 85% chance to increase the fill level of the composter by 1. And to get 1 Bonemeal out, you'll need to get the fill level all the way up to 7. So you're going to need just over 8 wart blocks to produce a single Bonemeal. Hence, as we need 39,170 Bonemeal to keep the farm self-sufficient, we'll need to farm at least 315,700 wart blocks an hour. But this isn't all, as we also need to account for the Bonemeal needed to generate the small fungi in the first place. The math need to work out the Bonemeal needed to produce 1 fungus is quite complicated, and it's something that I'll cover in the Fantif explanation video in the future. So for now, just accept that the average Bonemeal to generate a wart fungus is 0.4 and 0.45 for Crimson. Seeing as this farm goes through 15,667 fungus an hour, and Crimson uses the most Bonemeal per fungus, we're going to need an additional 7,050 Bonemeal an hour, or 56,800 wart blocks an hour, simply to generate the fungus that the farm uses. So if we want this farm to be truly 100% self-sustaining, then we're going to have to make a piston layout capable of harvesting 372,500 wart blocks an hour. Or more specifically, we're going to need a layout that harvests 23.77 wart blocks per fungus grown. So how do you even figure out how many wart blocks a specific configuration of pistons harvests per fungus grown? Well, just like everything else with nether tree farming, a sprinkle of math. The way I went about this problem was to first break it down step by step, traversing each major problem I encountered by simplifying it into a slightly smaller problem, until I eventually arrived at a fundamental property in the game's mechanics, which I could build myself back up from and bring everything together in a satisfying and accurate way. So the first step was to split up the general volume of the nether tree, which is a 7x7x27 box, into individual blocks, and then assign a pair of values to each block. These values would be the chance of a wart block and shroomlight generating at that specific point within the huge fungus. And so if you want to work out how many blocks your piston layout gets on average, you would simply add up those pairs for all the blocks you're harvesting. Okay, that's cool and all, but now we're left with the problem of how to find the chance of a wart block and shroomlight generating for every point within the volume of a huge fungus. Now, this isn't as simple as just looking at what region the block generates in, and then taking the hard-coded probabilities from those regions and assigning them to that block, as one single block often coexists in multiple different regions. And also, you need to consider that specific sizes and shapes of the nether tree are more likely to generate than others. So, let's start with just one nether tree shape. That way we can work out the probabilities using those hard-coded values independently of other nether tree variants, and then later find a way to add up all the values from each variant using some code. If we increment through each block in the 7x7x27 volume, and record the chance of a shroomlight and wart block generating at each position based on what region it's in, then we can make a list of the generation probabilities for every block for just that one specific nether tree variant. As some nether tree shapes are more likely to generate than others, we can't just assume a uniform probability across all the different variants. And so for each list of probabilities, we will need to calculate the chance of that shape growing. To find this requires a careful analysis of how the trunk height and the hat height of a nether tree are found, If you're unfamiliar with these terms, then I highly suggest checking out the first 3 minutes of the Shroomlight farm video, conveniently linked in the description below, as that explains these terms along with exactly how nether trees generate. Essentially, each shape of nether tree can be referred to as a layer value set, a set of integers ranging from 0 to 3 that describes the radius of the hat at each layer. This creates a stack of 1 block high square prisms acting as a sort of bounding box that the game will increment through 1 block at a time and try to generate a shroomlight or wart block at. To find the chances of a certain bounding box generating, we need to multiply the chance of the trunk height by the chance of the layer value set. Starting with the trunk height probability, which is by far the easiest to work out of the two, we can look at the equation that calculates trunk height and see that there's an equal 1 in 10 chance for trunk heights 4 to 13 to generate. Then there is a 1 in 12 chance for that height to double, meaning that for heights 8, 10, 12 through to 26, there's an additional 1 in 120 chance of them generating. Chucking this data into a table allows us to then grab any height and its probability for all 17 valid trunk heights. Now, moving on to the more menacing layer value set probabilities. This list of numbers is actually constant for a given trunk and hat height, meaning that if you can calculate all the different valid trunk and hat height pairs, then you can also find all the different hat bounding boxes too. Well, kinda. There's this small 2-layer high region which sits 1 block below the top of the hat, which is called the fringe. Here, each of these 2 layers can have a radius of either 1 or 2 blocks, meaning that in total there are 4 different fringe types: 1-1, 1-2, 2-1, and 2-2. Using the equation that determines the radius of a layer, we can calculate the chance of getting a 1 is 1 on 3 for the first layer, and 2 on 3 for the second layer, and the chance of getting a 2 is the opposite of that. Then you can compute the chance of each fringe type generating and store these values in a table. Luckily, these probabilities are constant regardless of the shape of a nether tree, meaning for each trunk and hat height pair, there are only 4 layer value sets, each with one of the 4 fringe types. And to find the total probability of the bounding box, we can multiply the trunk height, hat height, and fringe type chance all together. So now we need to find all the valid trunk and hat height pairs, as say for example you couldn't have a hat height of 11 but only a trunk height of 7, as wart blocks would then generate below or more than 1 block above the trunk. As discussed earlier, there are only 17 different trunk heights, T. We can plug each of these values into the hat height equation to then find the range of possible hat heights that we could get. For all but trunk heights 4, 5, and 6, the corresponding hat heights and their probabilities follow a nice pattern, which can be calculated with the equation P equals 1 on n, where n is T over 3 rounded down plus 1, and is the number of different hat heights H, starting from H equals 5, which are all uniformly distributed. For trunk heights 4 and 5, they only have one corresponding hat height each, being H equals 4 and H equals 5 respectively. Trunk height 6 is a tricky one because when plugged into the equation for n, it yields 3 hat heights, 5, 6, and 7. But, as you can't have a hat height greater than the trunk height, in this case 6, the 7 gets merged into a 6. This means that hat height 6 is produced twice out of the 3 times, while hat height 5 is only produced once. This is the only case out of every trunk height where the corresponding hat heights aren't evenly distributed. Plugging in all the trunk heights from 7 to 26 into the hat height equation, and then dealing with the edge cases for t equals 4, 5, and 6 separately, you can produce a list of 83 valid trunk and hat height pairs, which then turns into 332 unique layer value sets, each with its own bounding box probability once you factor in the fringe type. Now that we have a list of all the valid bounding boxes for nether trees, we can write a program that goes through all 332 of them. And for each, it increments through every block in its volume and evaluates the shroomlight and wart block generation chance, given the region that block is situated in, and then multiplies that by the chance of the bounding box generating. Here's a code I wrote which does all of that. It outputs the data for each nether tree into its own Excel spreadsheet, and then an additional sheet is used which combines them all together to produce 2 heat maps, which is precisely what we're after, as that tells us the chance of a wart block and shroomlight generating for any block within the nether tree volume. Then, if we want to work out how many wart blocks or shroomlights a specific piston layout harvests, we can simply select all the desired cells where each cell represents a block and sum them together. Now, there's actually 4 additional heat maps, 1 for stems, and 3 for each of the vines region manipulation layers. The stems one is actually as simple as adding up the probabilities of all the trunk heights that reach each layer, and then writing 0 for every other block. But the VRM one is a bit more complicated, as the code doesn't actually have explicit weightings for the vines region, and you have to derive them yourself by generating probabilities given certain constraints. which I won't be covering in this video, but specific information about it can be found in the Maths and Code channel on the Huge Fungi Huggers Discord. Now for the fun part. I mean, what? This whole part has been the fun part. Honestly, I enjoyed working on this theory more than designing the farm at times. Okay, so what can you do with 6 heat maps that accurately describe the distribution of blocks within a nether tree? Well, first of all, these values can be chucked into a 3D array, and Python can be used to quickly extract any number of data points and perform arithmetic upon them, such as rapidly prototyping different nether tree layouts, or analysing which areas of the nether tree are worth using vines region manipulation on. In fact, these heat maps are crucial to the accuracy and versatility of Stemlight, which is a general-purpose nether tree farming calculator that was used to design the layout for this farm, the simple and rapid nether tree farm, and also a few others by Dave and Spoop. The code for Stemlight, the heat maps, as well as that used for the animations throughout this video, can all be found on my GitHub, linked in the description below. So, after producing this heat map, we can clearly see that this range here from layer 2 to layer 12 is optimal. Hopping in game, we can make this layout here, which in theory should make 395,000 warp blocks an hour, but we sadly have to replace some of these pistons with observers, as there's no other way to power them. And we gotta sacrifice 2 columns of warp blocks to have enough space to harvest the trunk. With this slightly adjusted layout, our output drops to an insufficient 358,000 warp blocks an hour. But, thanks to the relatively recently discovered tech of vines region manipulation, we can actually take advantage of these holes in the wall and chuck warp blocks in there, as well as 1 block below the bottom layers to boost the rates to 459,000 warp blocks an hour. If you want to know how pre-placing these warp blocks increases the rates, then check out the explanation I put together in my Shroomlight Farm v2 video, linked in the description. This trick massively increases the rates of the farm to well above what is required for 100% self-sustainability by yielding an additional 101,000 warp blocks an hour. The only issue with this layout is that the outputted block streams aren't manageable at all, as they're so tall items from the top will get stuck below. So what I did was cut the wall in half and then rotate it by 90 degrees. So now each block stream is half as tall, allowing each to be processed much more efficiently. To power these pistons in the middle here, I use this alternating observer tower, which, thanks to quasi-connectivity, is able to power both sides at 4 game ticks, albeit with a 2 game tick offset. To extract more warp blocks and a couple extra stems, I further analyze this small region above layer 12, where the most optimal ring to harvest warp blocks drops from ring 2 to ring 1, and place some more pistons accordingly. Now that we have our layout mostly sorted out, we can focus on the other fundamental part of this farm, which is growing and processing the fungi. As I'm aiming for max rates for a 4 game tick nether tree farm, the most dispensers we can realistically use is 4, which is the same as in my previous Shroomlight farm, but this time there's a catch. Here I actually care about the stems and hence can't sacrifice the second layer of stems to place a dispenser at. Instead, we now have to put a dispenser around each edge of the base Nylium block, meaning we've got no room to extract the layer 1 stems that generate here. Or so you may think. There's this magical technical Minecraft player called Hamster, and they provided me with a device that essentially sucks the stems through the Nylium and can do so every 4 game ticks. This redstone circuit works by having pistons attempt to push up a slime bar, which is just at push limit, every 4 game ticks. When there's no blocks on top of the Nylium, the bottom piston is able to push up, which doesn't create enough block event delay to update this redstone block piston. Now, if there is a block on top of this Nylium, then the bottom piston will initially fail to extend, the iron block won't move, and the pulse will QC the redstone block piston, and the piston directly above it will update it as normal. This redstone block piston then changes the state of this rail, which causes a chain of updates to this block shuffling system, which uses 0 ticks to push the Nylium across and pull the stem down. At this point, this bottom log is already gone, so the bottom piston is now able to push up, which cuts off the pulse generated by the observer. Except this time, it has a sufficient amount of block event delay, which 0 ticks the redstone block piston and the system resets, all within the span of 4 game ticks. A key ingredient of any nether tree farm is a reliable way to replenish the Nylium in case it converts to netherrack, and this farm is no different. Here I'm using a dustless pulse extender which is constantly powered by the signals from the 4 game tick detection system. So if the Nylium does decay, then the circuit will eventually depower and indirectly trigger this regrowth dispenser. I say indirectly because as this dispenser is constantly firing, you can't just have Bonemeal sitting in it. So instead, the pulse extender activates another dropper behind it, which feeds in exactly 1 Bonemeal when the time is right. And the time is also right to reevaluate our layout and squeeze as many shroomlights out of this farm while still staying net positive on Bonemeal. So let's now switch over to the shroomlight heatmap and analyze some of the locations where shroomlights are most likely to generate, and then swap out some wart block optimized pistons for shroomlight optimized ones instead. I managed to harvest the top 16 most likely to generate spots before the wart block rates drop down to a number which I'm happy with, considering we're yet to add on the top blast chamber, which yields another 40k drops. Speaking of blast chambers, let's fix the lack of one we currently have. After browsing the Block 36 module market on Huge Fungi Huggers, I came across this astonishing design made by Zaith, which uses alternating cobble generators to output Block 36 TNT at up to 16 game tick. If you don't know what Block 36 TNT dupers are, then I advise you to watch Sergeant Potate's video, as he covered everything there is to know about them. These have been fine-tuned to cycle at 22 game ticks and not 16, as running them too fast can kill items unnecessarily, but too slow can cause blast chamber jams, which no one likes. But what people do like is waterfalls, and in this farm I've got 4 of them. These waterfall blast chambers give the items enough breathing room to peacefully drop out of range of the TNT blast radii, whilst also protecting the delicate core components of the farm from being blown up. On top of this, I've installed an additional and tamer set of TNT dupers that harvest large fragments of layers 16 to 21 to get us over the self-sustaining requirements with a comfortable factor of safety. Once the items make their way out of the waterfall blast chambers, they're funneled from all corners of the farm to this stone cutter, which stacks them together into groups of 64 to make the hoppers' lives a bit easier. This output stream connects to an external item processing system, and together with this and the core of the farm, they form what's essentially a symbiotic relationship, where the storage requires wart blocks to compost and fuel the fungus farm, and the core of the farm needs fungus from the storage to make more nether trees. Now, one of my aims with this farm was for it to meet as many demands as possible. For example, being self-sustaining, but also to get a lot of shroomlights, all without sacrificing on wood rates at all. This means having as much customizability as possible. Say for example, you're a crazy guy who would rather hang on to those 380,000 wart blocks an hour and instead build 20 moss farms to sustain the farm. Or maybe you're more reasonable and would like to keep the farm naturally self-sustaining, but keep any excess wart blocks instead of composting them. Or if you don't even like playing the game and would rather have the farm run without a player, well, that's where this control panel comes in, as it's used to control the logic required for switching between warped and crimson mode, Bonemeal and surplus wart block mode, self-sustaining and hyper wart block mode, being playlist or not, as well as of course safely turning the farm on or off. Something I briefly mentioned during the math explanation is that crimson fungi take a bit more Bonemeal to run than warped fungi. This is because crimson fungi farms are actually around 20% slower than their bluer counterparts, and so you actually need to run 2 fungi farms, even max speed ones, to keep up with the requirements of 4 game tick dispensers. But doing this would require more Bonemeal than the nether tree farm produces. So instead, this logic system here is used to only run the fungus farms when the farm begins to run dry, and so excess fungi is never produced and hence no excess Bonemeal is used up. Now, as for Playerless Mode, there's a bit more logic involved, as it needs to switch off all the systems involved with generating fungus for the player, as well as activate an internal clock, which is used to generate its own fungi every 8 game ticks in the core of the farm. If you've seen Omengo's attempts at a playless nether tree farm, this is essentially that, but on steroids, as it uses the same 4 game tick through dirt system to clear the bottom stem, and the same set of 4 game tick dispensers to yield an 87% chance of growing the fungi each 8 game tick cycle. This playlist mode works by using the Nylium Replenishing dispenser to generate nether foliage directly on the center Nylium, and then to clear that foliage after 8 game ticks, we can trick the through dirt system into thinking a tree is grown by push limiting the detection pistons with this sticky piston. Note, in playlist mode the farm is only 21% self-sustaining and around 20 times slower, so I recommend just running this farm with a Carper bot if you don't want to manually operate it. But I know some people love the idea of playlist farms, so that's why I opted to include a mode for that this time. As for the on-off switch, well, what can I say? It's a million times safer than that train wreck I had on the Shroomlight farm.
I don't even know if this thing works. I'll put it blunt: explosion, lava. Also, let me clarify, I built it wrong.
First off, each drooper has not only inbuilt spam protection, but also a built-in cooldown, meaning the issues with the first one had, with blowing up after turning the farm on too quickly, are now truly a thing of the past. Also, every lever is equipped with inbuilt spam protection, as to actually tell the farm the inputs you've chosen, you need to hit this button over here. This works by storing the player's inputs in 2 places: the levers and an array of RS NOR latches which save the player's inputs even when they flip the levers around. and the only way to load new values into memory is by hitting this button. Lastly, to help with light update lag, I fitted the farm with a tinted glass roof, but you can use any opaque block. So that's all the main parts of the core of the farm. Up next is something I heavily underestimated the scale of, and I've already shown parts of it throughout the video, but it's this freaking huge storage and item processing system. Like, it's bigger than the farm itself and involves over 100 individual mechanisms and pieces of logic to allow the farm to be fully customizable and capable of storing 50 million items, including wart blocks, stems, shroomlights, cobblestone, and even bonemeal. To help myself and others understand what's even going on here, I drew up this flowchart which highlights all the systems throughout the storage system, as well as the various wires that connect them. Essentially, this entire system takes in a set of inputs from the core of the farm, that being the 5 switches from the control panel, the item output stream, and a couple empty shulker box output streams. Processes each of them using a mix of redstone lines to toggle certain systems on or off, water streams to transport various items between systems, and internal logic to control and regulate these systems. Then the storage produces a set of outputs, that being bonemeal from composted wart blocks, the exact amount of fungi the player requires, and of course filled shulker boxes of all your favorite items. One of the main systems in this storage is this tileable continuous fungus farm, which you might recognize from a few videos ago. Fungi here is stack separated out, and desired fungi is then sent to a cache for further processing, whilst the rest of the drops are composted and loaded into shulker boxes to resupply some bonemeal. Over at the cache, a sequential logic gate is used to run the fungus farms only when the amount of fungus in the cache drops to a certain range. For example, when the cache is full, the fungus farm doesn't need to run anymore, otherwise the cache will overflow with items, and that would both waste bonemeal and cause excess lag. But once the fungus farm is switched off, the cache will inevitably start to drain. And now once it reaches around 1/3 full, the sequential logic gate switches off, which then turns on the fungi farm again. Once the cache fills up again, the fungus farm switches off, and to not immediately turn the fungi farm back on once the cache goes below signal strength 15, this repeater is locked, which in effect stores the state of the previous output of the logic gate, and is only overridden once the signal strength drops down to 7. There's some additional logic here which switches the signal strength input between each dropper depending on what mode is selected, and also a toggle which switches the entire fungus farm on or off if the condition for this triple AND gate isn't met. If you want to know more information about how this continuous fungus farm works, then I have a full 20-minute tutorial and explanation video on it, so I highly recommend you check that out. Apart from that fungus, I'm using 25 6x hopper speed filtered shulker box loaders, that's a mouthful, to store up to 555,000 items an hour, depending on what modes the farm is set to. As discussed earlier, the item output stream starts here with a stone cutter, where all the items bunch up. To almost guarantee that all the non-compostable items are filtered out before the composting array, the items are aligned against this wall, such that they're able to go around the same water stream 2 times, which gives them a much greater chance of being collected by the hoppers, in case they couldn't the first time due to hopper cooldown. Still though, around 40 stems make it past my defenses each hour, so these 2 item filters here sort out any remaining stem blocks, meaning you never have to worry about declogging composters here, pretty much. And if you decide you actually want to cling onto your warp blocks, then there's 16 more box loaders over here which are lag optimized, so only the warped run when you're on warp mode, and only the crimson runs when you're on crimson mode. Also, this dispenser here is really cool, so cool in fact I made a 9-minute math explainer video on it, going into the calculus behind its custom item output speed, so if you're interested in that, then there's another link in the description for you to go visit. Last, and certainly most, is this enormous bulk storage unit, which is a modified version of Playerless design. And although it can store 50 million items, if you decide to run this farm at max speed, slices will start filling up after around 50 hours, which is crazy to think about. Filled shulker boxes of a single item type emanate from the bottom of the box loaders, and then make their way through this maze of water streams and bubble elevators until they find their way into their allocated, active hopper locking bulk storage slices. I've included Command Leo's 5 game tick crafter, which can be used to rapidly convert stems into planks and ladders for smelting, or to break down bone blocks into bonemeal. Adjacent to this 5 game tick crafter is a lectern, which includes credits to all the wonderful people that directly or indirectly contributed to this project. So most of you watching this probably won't end up actually building the farm, but for those daring few, I'm going to tell you how to use the farm. So first, set your inputs at the control panel and press this button to load them into memory. Then grab a stack of fungi, and after a short delay you can enter the farm. Of course, if you set the farm to Playerless Mode, you can either set up a couple chunk loaders to keep the farm loaded, or AFK nearby the farm, as this farm does not work when it's unloaded, nor does it work on Bedrock. It doesn't work on Bedrock. It really doesn't, and you asking doesn't change that. Due to how dense this layout is for this farm, the player entry system is a bit convoluted, so bear with me here. Once you enter, you simply walk straight forwards and you'll auto go into crawling mode. Then navigate to the right and align yourself against this wall and stem block. Then face precisely this corner here to place fungi. Otherwise, you can open up the GUI of the Nylium Replenishing Dispenser, which you don't want. Then either spawn a carpet bot that places at 1 game tick intervals, or use any auto clicker of your own, which makes the player attempt to plant a fungus each game tick. The reason why the player must try and plant every game tick is that because of the through dirt system, there is only a 1 game tick window where the Nylium block is actually available to plant on. This means that if you have high enough ping, then you can miss planting cycles, which is another reason why I highly recommend running this farm with a carpet bot. Now, once you or your carpet bot is all set, you don't have to do anything else. Over a year of research and development has led up to this moment of you, the viewer, being able to get stuff in a video game without you even playing the game. How cool. Once you're done AFKing, swim back out here, and then after taking a bit of TNT damage, you can flip the on-off switch and load this input into memory, which will then switch off the farm after around 5 seconds. Now, for some modes, such as Playerless and non-composting, the farm isn't self-sustaining, meaning you'll need to provide a percentage of the Bonemeal that the farm uses per hour. This can be done by chucking shulker boxes of Bonemeal into this chest here. If you'd like to switch between Warped and Crimson mode, first flick this lever here, and then hit the button to load the mode change into memory. This will only toggle certain parts of the storage on and off, as well as changing which type of fungi is outputted. What it can't do is change the type of Nylium in the farm, or the type of pre-placed wart blocks used for vines region manipulation, which are vital to the farm's self-sustainability. To switch these out, you can grab a hoe, a pair of Nylium, and half a stack of wart blocks, and then use the maintenance halls of this farm, indicated by spruce wood materials. Start by manually opening up this iron door, and then go out this gate to the left and climb up the water, and replace all the wart blocks like I do here. Then, to replace the Nylium, align yourself here like you're about to run the farm, and then carefully break both Nylium and replace them with the other type. Also, to provide empty boxes to store the items this farm produces, come over to this double chest here and load up as many empty boxes as you have, as this farm goes through 322 per hour on average. If the farm ever does run out of empty shulker boxes, then it will automatically and indefinitely shut itself off and activate a warning light, which will stay illuminated until you give it some more empty boxes. And remember, you don't have to supply this farm with fungi, as it does it automatically. But in case you enjoy manual labor for some reason, I've also included a stock version of this farm in the world download, which just has the core of the farm and no additional storage logic. My number 1 tip is to first watch through the explanation part of this video, as it provides you with an intuition that will aid you through the debugging of any issues related with this farm, including those I'm not able to cover in an upcoming troubleshooting guide video. My number 2 build tip is to first test the world download in a creative world to ensure the farm works on your system with your specific set of mods, and then build it in survival using the Lightmatica mod, and go layer by layer. I recommend placing in the TNT last though, just in case you accidentally trigger a duper at the wrong time whilst building it. For the item filters, use renamed filter items, and if you get stuck with any of the storage components, I suggest consulting the storage jet Discord, as they're good at hopper stuff. Once you've built it all, before touching anything, verify the schematic to ensure everything is in the right spot and in the correct orientation. Then go through each of the modes to double check they're all functioning properly. Also, I recommend against rotating the farm, as it breaks the fungus farm and can lower the rates of the nether tree farm. When running the farm for the first time, run it without placing down any fungus to see that everything turns on properly. Then run with fungus one at a time, slowly ramping up in speed until you're confident it's all functioning as intended. Well, it's a bit surreal to actually have this project done. The scope of this farm has grown exponentially with time, and it's literally the pinnacle of all the nether tree math I've been working on over the past 2 years, so it feels unreal to finally accumulate 1,000 hours of work into a 35-minute video. As always, the world download, all schematics, credits, further info, development logs, math, code, and resources such as Stemlight and the Heatmaps can all be found on the Huge Fungi Huggers Discord or in direct links in the description down below. I can't thank you enough for watching this far into the video. It's just awesome when you guys do that. And I'm excited to showcase what projects I've got coming up next. Tschüss!